Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Over the weekend, as I'm looking through stories and looking through some of the chatter that's taking place on social media, I came across this notion of the UK and the United States basically boycotting or threatening to boycott the Beijing Olympics. Now, this is pretty astonishing. Oftentimes what they're trying to use on this is human rights as a way of trying to go against China. This is just another area of quote-unquote deep competition in the way that the U.S. and its vassal states are going about this. Considering this country was just now revealed that we killed like 60 women and children, and then recently killed another 7 women and children, then this has basically been the way wars have been waged, despite the fact they haven't even called them wars, over the last 20 years. We can still point our finger and say that those guys are betraying human rights. It's astonishing. It's just like the Tillis memo said. You basically attack people who are not your friends on issues of human rights, while your friends who have atrocious levels of human rights issues, let's say Saudi Arabia, for example, gets a complete pass. And now this has gone all the way to the Olympics. To have a conversation about this and other issues that are taking place right now, we're joined with Carl Jha. He's host of Silk and Steel podcast focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, politics, and culture. Carl, how's it going, my man? Thank you for joining us.
Hey, hello again.
Absolutely. So I want to start with the Beijing thing. I mean, there's a few other issues to get to, but what is China's thoughts on this? I mean, this just seems to be another level of, okay, we need to find something else to pick with China about. And using the Beijing Olympics as one of the ways to basically do this. Has China responded to this at all? And what has been their take on this kind of, I guess you can say, pivot in this particular regard?
I don't think China had made any official statement about this, but this is ridiculous, as you pointed out. I mean, if first they tried to use all kind of excuse to boycott the Olympics. First it was the so-called Uyghur genocide. I mean, if they really believe there's a real genocide going on, they should just boycott, no question.
Well, not just boycott, stop dealing with them business-wise. I mean, you have these huge trade relationships, and you're basically saying these guys are the Nazis. Okay, fair enough. If that's true, then what's the feeling today of people who were basically trading with the Nazis while they were committing genocide and murdering the Jews in that way? You know what I mean? Like, it's illogical on its face. It's like, oh, no, we're going to keep these trade relationships, but these guys are basically Nazis. It's nonsense. I'm sorry, Carl. Please finish.
Yeah. I mean, they're just using it as a tactic now, a negotiation chip. And the U.S. has always used human rights as a negotiation chip, as a kind of club to beat on government they don't like. And in particular case, now they're trying to use a Pengshuai case as an excuse to talk about boycott Olympics. I mean, this is a country that had a huge scandal on the U.S. gymnastic team, and we are gonna use the Pengshuai case happening in China as an excuse to boycott. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, it actually does make sense to me. I know why they're doing this, but logically, it's totally ridiculous.
So here's the thing. On a general case, there's a lot of stuff that I agree with you on. But in the specific case, it's also kind of weird. And I'll put it like this. I don't think that we should be boycotting China's Olympics over this. I agree that seems like merely a political move. But, it is kind of weird. Maybe we can get into the specifics of the case. Pengshuai, tennis player, a couple weeks ago made accusations against the former vice premier of China. Was sensed, and this is, again, super highlights. I'll leave it to you to clean up any inaccuracies, Carl, or any, fill in any missing holes, that kind of thing. She makes these accusations. She's not heard from for a couple of weeks. Then we hear from her in the form of a sort of short email written in her voice saying that the things that she said were wrong and she retracts them, but she's doing fine. People speculate, hey, she's being coerced. Maybe she's even dead. Some people go that far. Then a couple days ago, over the weekend, media comes out, photos come out of her, video comes out of her at a party, multiple videos have now come out, that kind of thing, confirming, okay, no, she's alive. But people still speculate, maybe she's being coerced, not necessarily violently, but coerced nonetheless. And then this, sort of hits at these larger notions of China as this authoritarian, heavy-handed state that will, suppress local dissent, even if it's just a tennis player making a sexual harassment allegation. That's a sort of high-level narrative going on over in the States, and it's an interesting case. Carl, what do you see? What do you think I might have got wrong or framed incorrectly in the way that I framed that, because I think that is how the West sees this one. But Carl, take it away.
Right. I mean, I for people who really want the whole 9 yards details, they actually can go check out the Reddit translation of Pengshuai's original Weibo post. So what we know about this case right now is what Pengshuai posted on her verified Weibo account. And then very soon it went viral in China. Everybody knew about it, but the censors, either she removed it or the censor removed it. That Weibo post was gone, but not before everybody took screenshot and shared it around. So now everybody knew about it. Now the content of this post obviously is in Chinese. There are different translations, but this is one instance where one rare instance, I would say, Reddit become useful. I read the Reddit English translation. I read the original Chinese post. The Reddit translation actually comes pretty close. So basically, Pengshuai related her kind of the whole affair, sexual entanglement with a former vice premier of China. And she said that after not seeing her for 7 years, originally they had a sexual relationship more than 10 years ago, but when he became the vice premier, he stopped it. And then after like 7 years not basically ghosting her, he invited her to his own home with his wife, and there he pressured her to have sex with him. That's the language she used. She said he pressured her and she did not agree, but then she stayed on to have dinner with him and his wife. So it's with the full knowledge of the wife. So obviously the vice premier has some kind of open relationship with the wife. And what she said someone was, when the vice premier took her to the room and pressure to have sex, there's someone outside, and it was not very clear. I think almost seems like she was implying that the wife was on the lookout, kind of guard their house, because the next sentence she said, it's so unbelievable that the wife would agree to do this.
Yeah.
And then she stayed on to have dinner with them. And she said after dinner, she still did not agree to have sex. At that point, the vice premier, or former vice premier, told her that he hated her. He never forget her through all 7 years, and how much he misses her. And then she said she felt scared and panicked, and then she had a very mixed feel, and because she recalled the fond affection she did feel for him 7 years ago, finally she did agree to have sex with him. And so she was definitely pressured into having sex. But after that, they continued their relationship. They continued the affair for another 3 years, and they keep on seeing each other. But what happened was that he didn't want to make the affair public, even though the wife already know. And she wanted more than just a secret affair. But he told her that, at his position, divorce is impossible, and he just wanted to keep it under wraps, have her on the side as a secret mistress. And then she got upset, and then on top of that, even though the wife was kind of okay, but when he's not around, the wife will making snide remarks that it's very humiliating for her. So she decided enough is enough. Yeah. That's why she posted this her Weibo post. So this, if the allegation is true, this is a very powerful man, a very manipulative man. Manipulated her, pressure a woman much younger than him. I think there's like a 30-year age gap between them. The former vice premier is now like 75 or something like that. So this is something that we know happens in many societies, and is very. This is something very, very creepy. Very this deserves to be condemned. But what happened next? I think it's a combination of self-owned by the Chinese censors, because if she didn't remove the post herself, then the Chinese censor removed it. And then when other people try to post screenshot on Chinese social media, a lot of those posts are being removed. So Pengshuai's Weibo account is still up. I checked. But what happened is that all the comment section on her previous posts have been disabled. So I'm pretty sure the censor did that. And that created the impression that, maybe Pengshuai is in trouble. So, and then, we have, then the Western media, of course, pounced on it because they look for anything to paint China in the worst possible light. And there's like conspiracy saying, first, like, I see people even saying stuff like maybe Pengshuai has been killed, maybe like, why she's been disappeared. It's the same kind of a talk that when Alibaba's founder, Jack Ma, disappeared from public view, there was a big media frenzy also about how China disappeared Jack Ma. But eventually Jack Ma surfaced. But this is, I think, this is one of the way that it's a self-owned on China's part because the overactive censorship and also how the Chinese state media handle it. Here in the West, we're told like, so the Chinese propaganda is some powerful machine that's going to brainwash people. But if you watch the Chinese state media actually in action, it's pretty pathetic. They posted supposedly her email, which raised the question, how did the Chinese state media get hold of her email? And then they posted the moments from her WeChat, again, leaves the question, how did the state media get to her, friend circle? None of that explained, and the video that released has a clear date. They have a very clear focus on the date that was showing this was yesterday. So every bit of it looks staged. So people obviously this is all going to raise all kind of questions, especially outside of China, especially in the Western coverage of China. China is already under microscope, and the Chinese state media is not helping themselves by doing all these very clumsy attempts to kind of debunk so-called the Pengshuai case.
Carl, I want to cut him very briefly, partly because that's a very fair and I think accurate and just balanced summary of what's happened here. And looking into the translation, which I had not read, and I'm sure a lot of folks hadn't, by the way, you can find for yourself. Pengshuai we're talking about. Her name is spelled, by the way, for the audience, Pengshuai. If you're curious, if you're hearing what we're talking about and you're like, wait, how do I find out about this? And you can search that name, Pengshuai. You can do a search for that. And if you look up Reddit translation, you'll see the translation of her original sort of letter on this. And again, it's pretty readable reading through it. Now, here's a couple things still come to mind, Carl. But I'll start with this one.
Go ahead.
Why would state censors be covering for the former vice premier? I would understand that this is, the former vice premier. He's going to have power. He's going to want, if he's manipulative, which it sounds like he is, he's going to use that power to get what he wants. And so I could see him potentially coercing her on the back end, doing something like that. But state censors getting involved. This is covering for a former vice premier's sexual assault, or alleged sexual assault, that kind of thing. And I get it's complicated, but still they're covering for it. This is the state intervening to, on the behalf of a former vice premier. Wouldn't the West be right to hit them on this, even though they completely don't understand the specifics of the case? What's your take on it, Carl?
Okay, so this is my personal take, right? I mean, the Western media obviously come from very, very bad faith. But I think it's a good thing. I actually think it's a good thing. You actually force the Chinese state media have to respond to provide whereabouts of Pengshuai, whether she's okay or not, and they can't just keep it under wraps. So at the time, I say the Western media is going crazy, trying to paint a bad light of China. It doesn't mean all the effect is negative. The positive effect is forcing China in a way to be more transparent. And as you mentioned, why would the Chinese censor cover for a former vice premier? This is something, an aspect of Chinese censorship I've complained about over and over again, is the Chinese state censors want to control the narrative on everything. Because what happened is this is a very big scandal, and you will invite a lot of public discussion. And what they're afraid of, invariably, it will lead to the discussion about kind of the nature of the Communist Party and the relationship between the government and the state and the people. And so the censor usually don't want that. They don't want too many controversies.
We have that here in the States. Everybody, I mean, a lot of people internationally, of course. The Hunter Biden story, I would allege, is in its own way a much bigger scandal than what we're describing in this case. You have the literal son of the current sitting president, the son, the main guy, who did all this stuff, prostitutes and crack cocaine and all these things in a very high-profile case that was systematically and meticulously suppressed by local social media platforms. And I don't know, I don't use Weibo. I'm not sure how your censors work exactly, but you were saying they don't work too well. Here in the States, I would argue they work pretty well. People trying to send direct messages on Twitter with details in this Hunter Biden story and having the links automatically hidden so they couldn't literally communicate. And again, people can see it, and I don't know how, everybody sort of sees what's happening. And so I don't know what they can ultimately do to combat that. But in terms of actually suppressing the story, we have that in common here in the States. And so I don't want to come to you so sort of uber critically as a Western media outlet, with a lack of understanding. We have some shared problems here, but it's also a worrying case,
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, like the problem with the Chinese censor trying to control narrative on everything, they end up owning everything. I mean, like in this case, Chinese government didn't have to insert itself between a feud between a tennis player and the former vice premier. I mean, he's not even in office anymore. Like this is like the Chinese government could totally just distance themselves with this thing and be done with it. But no, this is like they're kind of the urge for control on the censor side to control everything, and then that means that they end up owning everything. And the worst impulse that triggers the worst impulse on the Western media is saying, okay, oh my God, Pengshuai is probably getting arrested and probably being held under, against her will. And in a way, all the frenzy, I think in a way the scrutiny is good because it does force the Chinese state media have to respond. And when the scandal first broke out, I mean, most of the Chinese, I think, probably have the same thoughts that Pengshuai is just getting muzzled, but nobody really seriously thought like Pengshuai is in some kind of personal danger, like her safety is in danger. That's what a lot of the Western media is implying.
Yeah, and even muscled.
They were implying.
That's 100%. And even muscled, I would just assume she's getting like not even a stern talking to necessarily, but just a talking to or something, that party officials would be coming down and having conversations with her, or that mutual friends between her and the former vice premier, that kind of thing. Who the heck knows? My point is, you're right in saying that that's where the West is going with it, but that doesn't seem justified either before these photos or videos came out or even after it. It's a possibility, but it would seem like an overreaction. You just want to talk to her if you're trying to get her to stop saying that stuff.
I mean, all they have to do is, but right now, after all this video of her surface, after she made a Zoom call with the IOC chairman, the people are still spinning like, okay, like this is not acceptable, because in reality nothing is acceptable. they want Pengshuai to go to like the Washington Post headquarters and make a statement denouncing the Communist Party. That will be the only acceptable solution basically for the Western media at this point. But I'm just glad. Looks like Pengshuai is in good spirit. Looks like she's okay. At this, and also I hope it will be a learning opportunity for like the Chinese censors that they don't have to freaking cover everything. And I do think there's a serious possibility that the vice premier might be investigated, because the thing is, Pengshuai didn't make a formal charge against him, about sexual harassment. So like the Chinese court can handle it at this point. But he's a former vice premier, but however, he's still a member of the Communist Party. So within the Communist Party, they have the Communist Party disciplinary committee that kind of handle all these kind of extra legal investigation into his party members. So it's very likely that this former vice premier will be investigated. And like during those big anniversaries, like the 100 years anniversary, all these leaders and former leaders sometimes get invited to show up on top of Tiananmen Gate and inspecting the parade. I bet former Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli is not going to show up in public anytime soon, and he so I it's my hope that he did get investigated. I do believe Pengshuai deserves some justice. I mean, if her allegation is true, and at the same time, he also makes the maybe hopefully makes the Chinese government realize. Sometimes a little bit transparency is the best. So at least it doesn't have to attract all these kind of unwanted attention from the Western media, who are just basically flies attracted to any crack in the egg.
Yeah, they're looking for anything to basically jump on. Carl, I want to move slightly or pivot a bit, not slightly, significantly so, over into Ethiopia. In reading over the weekend, Ethiopia and China basically have trade relationship. In fact, China is its main trading partner pretty much for anyone else. 21% of, let's say, brand new projects originated in the United States, 31% originated in China. And this kind of goes to this African pivot that China has basically had. I mean, it's all sorts of relationships, financial relationships with Africa. And that was something that was obvious to see when I was in Kenya a few years ago. What's their perspective on this? I mean, they've seen kind of the West and the way the West has basically been intruding into what has been going on, even in the way that it talks about it, like just the propaganda that goes around it. I mean, this article from the Washington Post doesn't even bring up the fact that the TPLF started the conflict. I mean, and they're acting as if, the West has been more neutral on this process and everything else. How is China regarded this conflict, considering that they're one of Ethiopia's main trading partners, or the main trading partner in Ethiopia?
This is a good question because actually, in terms of China's perspectives, it doesn't really matter which side wins the conflict, because if you look at China's pragmatic diplomatic history, China will work with whoever is in power. This happened in the conflict in Sudan. I mean, U.S. was actively backing the Southern Sudanese rebels to have an independent Southern Sudan, and they position it as a way to, wing off Sudan off the Chinese influence, because at that time, most of the oil in Sudan is in South Sudan, and PetroChina has a big operation over there. But instead, that's one of the George Bush's crowning achievement, was celebrating the independence of South Sudan. But right after South Sudan became independent, China moved in, established relationship, continue to pump oil. So nothing, from China's side, they will deal with whatever is internationally recognized government. So whether it's a TPL, because the TPLF, they used to rule Ethiopia for a long time.
27 years.
And they've just been like last few years they've been dislodged. But whether Ethiopia was in TPF control or the current president Abiy control, China always had a working relationship with Ethiopia. So it's really like U.S. I actually would like to talk about. I don't know if you guys seen that recent New York Times article on how U.S. lost ground to China in Congo. I mean, that is a more. It's mind-boggling that New York Times, the paper of record, is so open about advocating for a U.S. empire in Africa. I think because the Ethiopia story is a little bit more complicated. So this is also like an ethnic conflict between the Tigrayan and the ethnic Tigrayan, and also the other ethnic group in Ethiopia, Amhara, and that's always, when you try to talk about ethnic conflict, it's always fraught. It ends up taking, which side you're taking on, and U.S. in Ethiopia plays a very ambiguous role because Abiy, U.S. have been friendly with Abiy's government as well. Abiy was invited to like Davos and like all the, but at the same time, U.S. kind of belatedly pivoted to the Ethiopian conflict.
Yes.
Especially now they're talking about the, human rights atrocities that's happening in Ethiopia, and particularly among the U.S. military. There's a couple articles. There's one in Foreign Policy says, Ethiopians should trust U.S. to come in and do an intervention. And there's another article by a former.
I've yet to meet an Ethiopian that believes in the U.S. at this point. And that kind of goes to this other question. And do you think that the U.S., especially media, has been so heavy-handed against the Ethiopian government because of its relationships with China? I mean, like you said, the TPLF had a relationship with China also. I mean, so
to give you a sense among the local Ethiopians, literally here in D.C., and I'll hand it back to you, Jamarl, because I know you were going with a specific question.
Major protest,
but just framing this in terms of the facts locally. There was a protest by Ethiopians in front of the White House. A lot of people came out. No local news coverage. No outside cameras from MSNBC, CNN, Fox, whatever, BBC. And yet, if you look around, and it makes sense, a lot of the signs, pretty much most of the signs, were like, fake news, BBC, stop lying about Ethiopia. Exactly. People were incredibly critical of news coverage. So, Jamarl, I know you're going somewhere, but Carl, that's sort of the...
Yeah, it's kind of that part, right? I mean, considering China had a relationship with both, but is it just one of those things that the U.S. believes that the Abiy Ahmed government will be less likely to kind of, let's say, increase its relationship with the U.S. as compared to the TPLF, which at this point seems like it would owe the U.S. if it indeed continues with the sanctions and continue to find ways to undermine the government. And this clearly is going to improve the relationship between Ethiopia and China, correct?
I mean, if you look at the media coverage, it is I agree, it's very suspicious. After the Foreign Policy article about why Ethiopia should trust the West, you have a Bloomberg opinion article by the former General James Starvis, who I think he was a top NATO commander. And the title was Ethiopia's Civil War is a problem U.S. troops can help solve. I mean, these guys just love to insert U.S. everywhere. I think U.S. is more... I would say U.S. is very opportunistic. I think they saw the ethnic conflict and the Civil War as an opportunity to insert U.S. troops presence in Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is a very important country in the Horn of Africa. It hosts the African Union in its capital, so it's a very important country. I think U.S. definitely sees the Civil War as a way to expand its own footprint in Ethiopia, and maybe they see possibly at expense of China. But I don't think that will actually work out, because China don't necessarily see everything as black and white. They will work with whoever's in power. It's only U.S. We are always see the world as some kind of Manichaean struggle between the light and the darkness. There's always like one good side, one the bad side, right? This is my take. My take is U.S. is just being opportunistic, trying to insert more military presence at the Horn of Africa because it's a very strategic region.
Very cool. Carl, thank you, my man. Always appreciate these conversations. And I think I agree with you with the opportunistic thing. I think my concern is that dictatorships are easier to deal with because you have basically one power source, as opposed to democracies that are a little bit more messy. And whereas China is willing to work with either, well, it seems that the TPLF is going to give or offer something to the U.S. in this case if they get back in power. And some of that may be leverage in association with China on this. That was my thinking about it. That's why I was asking the question in that way. Carl, thank you very much. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Carl Jha is host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow him at Carl Jha on Twitter and follow his podcast, Silk In, and subscribe and support his podcast at patreon.com, Silk and Steel. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Thomas and Stranahan back in a moment.